Go. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Autist Circle, Season 2, Episode number 5. Hendrick ter Brugghen, the Caravaggio Shadow in Holland.
Yeah. This was a we're moving a little back in the timeline on this one. Because he actually is after he was before Van Dyck. He's more contemporary to Caravaggio. Van Dyck was a little later than Caravaggio. But he was one of the Dutch Caravaggists, the Utrecht Caravaggists as they're known. And he was one of the people that helped bring that Caravaggio style to Northern Europe. So with that said, we'll go ahead and hop over to the timeline here.
Well, just a quick bit of housekeeping. Since my internet decided to go full Virginia legislature, we're only doing it on Total Blackout Painting today.
And I'm recording it so he can upload it to his channel later. Yeah, we'll go from there. But yeah, so we got the timeline, the standard timeline. We can see Caravaggio was born quite a bit before ter Brugghen, and dies while ter Brugghen is still alive. Ter Brugghen's time overlaps with the 30 Years' War, which will become a little bit germane. But also we can see that ter Brugghen's his early life overlapped with the late Renaissance and Mannerism. So I'll go ahead and read my spiel here, and then we'll move on. So Hendrick ter Brugghen was trained under a Mannerist, but became an important artist in the Northern Baroque tradition. His assimilation of Caravaggio's style brought new depth to the North and helped expand their artistic vocabulary. He's born before the rise of Baroque and was able to see the transition from the idealized and stylized works of the High Renaissance and Mannerism to give way to the gritty realism of the Baroque era. He stood at a crucial time in art history and helped bring the language of Caravaggio to the Dutch Republic, which ultimately helped carry them into the Dutch Golden Age. He was a key figure in the Utrecht Caravaggisti. Those are disciples of Caravaggio. And without their influence, we likely wouldn't have artists like Rembrandt. So it was a pretty influential painter of his time. And let's see. So now we'll jump into the biography here. This is a drawing of the man. He was born, Hendrick ter Brugghen was born in 1588 in the Dutch Republic, although the exact location is really up for debate. In fact, a lot of this guy's life is very fuzzy. There's not a ton of documentation or solid documentation. And even some of the documentation that is there, I have not switched my scene. I fucked up. So there's the timeline. I'm sitting there watching my thing and looked at my stream. So there's the timeline briefly. So we can see what I was talking about with the Caravaggist movement and his overlap. So anyhow, here he is. He was born in 1588, like I was saying. The older sources have suggested that he was possibly born in The Hague, although his family has been connected to Deventer, and he's most heavily associated with Utrecht. His father, Jan Egberts, it's a weird Dutch name. There's a lot of weird Dutch names in this. Jan Egberts was appointed secretary of the court of Utrecht by William the Silent. That's this guy, who is also known as William of Orange. He was the leader of the Dutch revolt against the Spanish Habsburgs that set off the 80 Years' War. So that's why you see the war listed on there.
Hmm.
He and resulted in the formal independence of the United Provinces in 1648, and he was born into the House of Nassau. He became the Prince of Orange in 1544, and thereby the founder of the Orange-Nassau branch and the ancestor of the monarchy of the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, William of Orange is known as the father of the fatherland. So, just an interesting side note. So, as a result, his childhood is confirmed to have been in Utrecht. And Utrecht was a unique place, as most of the Dutch Republic was primarily Protestant, but it remained Catholic. And this led the community to have a strong Catholic presence, and as a result of its influence or its connection to Rome, it had heavy Italian influence. So, ter Brugghen's artistic training began under Abraham Bloemaert. I think it's Bloemaert. And he was one of the most respected artists in Utrecht at the time, and he blended mannerism with emerging Baroque techniques, and that gave ter Brugghen exposure to a broad range of styles and ideas. And Bloemaert was a very prolific artist at the time, and he trained numerous artists that would go on to represent the Utrecht Caravaggisti style. And in lieu of having paintings of or pictures of the people, I've got paintings that they did here. So those artists include Jan van Billiert, who did this painting called The Concert. Gerard van Honhorst, who was the second runner-up for this spot and who we might cover in the next season. This is a painting of his, another one called The Concert. And finally, Bartholomeus Breenberg, who did this painting. This is St. Paul and Barnabas at Lystra.
So no concert. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. So between 1604 and 1607, like many of the previously mentioned artists, he made a pilgrimage to Italy to encounter the artistic revolution, or where he encountered the artistic revolution unleashed by Caravaggio.
It's kind of all roads lead to Caravaggio.
It kind of is, and this is going to be a very Caravaggio heavy episode because his influence is so prominent in the work. And so this one is this painting is Pilate washing his hands, which is a famous story we all know, and we can definitely see this was painted in 1617, and you can definitely see the Caravaggio's influence in this. With the heavy shadow and the closely packed frame and the tight up close view of the people and the realism in their faces. So in the early 1600s, he traveled to Italy and was in Italy until 1614, according to biographical accounts. Although, like many things, the detail of this are a bit hazy. So Caravaggio died in 1610 at a young age, as we know. But his influence was still causing a stir in the art world. So ter Brugghen was likely in Italy while Caravaggio was still alive, although there's actually no solid evidence that they ever interacted. Especially since during that time, Caravaggio was in exile from Rome because of the death or the murder, you could say.
Yeah.
But although he did interact with Rubens, so he was familiar with Rubens, who was a contemporary of all these guys as well. So he did not interact with him, but his influence was unmistakable. And here's some pictures to describe. This is the harsh directional light, and this is a Caravaggio painting. This is Saint Francis of Assisi in ecstasy, and from 1595.
Hmm.
And then the closely packed figures. And of course, we talked about this one. This is the Calling of St. Matthew. And it also signaled the same dramatic intimacy that was the hallmark of Caravaggio's work. And this is another one. This is the Musicians, painted by Caravaggio, which of course shows another tightly packed frame with very intimate. It's a very intimate setting. And fun fact, it's believed to have a self-portrait of Caravaggio in the back here. The brown-haired kid in the back is meant to be Caravaggio.
I can see that from his self-portrait that we've already looked at.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So while in Italy, he absorbed the influence like a sponge, and he mixed it with his own northern style. And now official records show that ter Brugghen was primarily in Rome. However, it's believed that he spent time in Naples and northern Italy. And in the summer of 1614, he was in Milan on his way back to the Netherlands, studying the works of Italian Baroque masters at the time. And upon his return to Utrecht in 1615, he didn't just bring home Italian style, he helped create the Dutch version of Caravaggism, which was the driver for the rest of his career. So this is the, you know what, let me share my...
I've got the presentation up, which
Okay.
I will encourage anyone listening, go through the presentation that has been provided. It's a wealth of knowledge, and it's a great jumping off point for other explorations.
Yeah, I spent a bit of time on the presentation, and it's linked in the description of this video. So anyhow, this is so upon returning to Utrecht by 1615, he was back in Utrecht, where he re-entered civic and professional life, and he's identified as one of the principal Dutch painters to bring back the Caravaggio influence to Northern Europe. In 1616, he was enrolled as a master in the Guild of St. Luke that we spoke about during last week's Van Dyck presentation.
Mm-hmm.
So on October 15th in 1616, he married Joachimijn. I can't even say that word. Verbeek.
Yeah, I think it's Joachimijn.
Joachimijn, okay. Joachimijn Verbeek. Or Verbeek. Which, fun fact, she has a listing on genealogy websites. So, which would make sense because they had 8 children together. And these are the official records of baptism. One of them, his oldest son, Richard, there's no records of his baptism, but he's believed to have been born in 1616. His daughter Maria was baptized in 1617. And then there's Hendrick the Younger, who was baptized in 1619. Johannes in 1621. Joachimijn, or Jacob, whatever, Joachimijn, was baptized in
Joachimijn.
Joachimijn. Baptized in 1623, Elizabeth in 1625, Gertrude in 1626, Cornelia in 1628, and Hennigshen was born in 1630. So that's the year after he died. So he had a huge
was a busy
family,
man,
right? It's like he kept his wife.
When did he find time to paint? I mean, wow.
Right? I know. So it's kind of crazy. So in the 1620s, he was raising a very large family while creating some of the most important works of his career. And when he returned to Utrecht, he became one of the key artists to translate Caravaggio's revolutionary style into Dutch language. And in Utrecht, that imported Roman drama was softened, deepened, and made more psychologically reflective. So on November 1st, 1629, at the age of 41, so again, much like Van Dyck, very young, he dies at the height of his artistic maturity, leaving behind 7 kids and 1 on the way. A body of work that we're still admiring today. So, like the fact that he had 8 kids really just blows my mind. For a couple of reasons. One, because there's so many artists that don't have a lineage, right?
Hmm.
Like, there are people alive today that can trace their heritage back to this man, which I think is fantastic. I think it's really cool.
Hmm.
But it also helped later on, and I didn't put this in the presentation, but I'll talk about it now. So his son Richard, who died in 1710, in the early 1700s, really tried to help revitalize his father's image,
Hmm.
and petition to have him more formally recognized for his work, and worked to he got signed letters from people who had spoken to Rubens, and Rubens spoke very highly of ter Brugghen's work. So Rubens was a fan, which says a lot, because Rubens was, of course, as we know, one of the most amazing, painters of the Dutch era. So,
Indeed.
with that, it was a quick biography because one, it's pretty hazy, and two, he died young. So we got through that quick, but we got a lot of painting to talk about. So we're gonna jump to the first painting, which is the Calling of Saint Matthew. The story of which we covered during Caravaggio's episode and the painting we showed earlier. So this is painted in 1621. It's oil on canvas, currently located at the Centraal Museum in Utrecht. It measures 40¼ by 54 inches, or 102 by 37 centimeters. So it's a fairly decent sized painting.
Yeah.
So, taking cues from Caravaggio's work of the same name, it features people in contemporary garb, which is again common in the Baroque period, and it shows the moment where Christ calls upon Matthew to become his apostle. And this shows if you look at a lot of ter Brugghen's work, it's almost all half figures. He does a lot of half figures. I don't know if he just didn't like drawing feet, but
The kind of man we need now.
but it really crops in and gives you a really close and intimate look at the setting. And and it also compresses the space to make it, it makes you seem closer to the action.
Well, and just from a human perspective, when you're in a situation like this, say you've walked into that room, you're approaching the table, are you going to be taking in the whole scene, or are you going to be focusing on kind of like the upper body? You're focusing on facial expressions and hand gestures, things like that, rather than their feet. It's just something that popped into my head while we're discussing that. It's like, because it's a very natural framing in that sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because Caravaggio's framing is, of course it has the full figure, but it's also from a distance where you're viewing the scene from the outside. And this one, you're almost part of it because you're in close to it. So this one, of course, as you see, is different in other ways, because the colors are more vibrant, which is more common in Northern traditions. And additionally, he doesn't adopt the stark Caravaggisti light. In this, he maintains a soft and gentle light, consistent with Northern traditions at the time. And while we focus on Caravaggio's work, the tenebrism, when discussing his work, he was also a pioneer of the tighter, more intimate compositions that removed the scenes from the grand scale of the Renaissance traditions. Because as we know, we saw many of the Renaissance paintings. They're often of a grand scale or a grand composition. And even many of the Mannerist paintings that we looked at during Pontormo had the same kind of more grand layout to them.
Mm-hmm.
In this, he's balancing Caravaggio's realism with the northern pictorial compositions. The dense framing and the rough features of the models show this is a translation of Caravaggio's style into northern traditions, because it has the more rough edge look on people instead of them being super idealized or stylized like in mannerism or in the Renaissance tradition. So he takes Caravaggio's famous calling scene and he cools it down. It doesn't seem as like there's a lot of drama in Caravaggio's work of this, because especially on the facial expressions, Saint Matthew is much more surprised in Caravaggio's painting. In this one, he softens the drama and he shifts the palette towards the silvery northern colors, and he turns the thunderbolt conversion into something more intimate, reflective, and unmistakably Dutch. And he turns the scene from one of a stark realization, like we saw in Caravaggio's work. He turns the confusion into slow recognition, and he changes kind of the psychological feel of the work. Like, the drama it's not as heightened in this one. It as it is in Caravaggio's, of course, because of the setting, the layout of Caravaggio's work with Jesus pointing and then the light shining in on Matthew. This one, it does show, Matthew's a little surprised, but he's more like, who, me? Not like, holy shit, me?
It's almost a level of incredulity.
It is.
Right,
it is.
Yeah, that's. I do like the facial expressions in this.
Yeah, I really I enjoy the way he does faces because he puts so much detail into the faces and also into the hands as well, which we'll see in the next painting we're talking about here, which is also one that we covered during Caravaggio, and that is the Incredulity of St. Thomas. So this one was painted in 1622. It's oil on canvas. It measures 43 by 54 inches or 109 by 136.5 centimeters. And this is currently in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. So unlike other compositions, this is a tight compression of the scene with ter Brugghen's characteristic half figures. It shows the translation of Caravaggio's use of light into the northern style, where it's it's softened and more silvery. The harsh tones give way to softer transitions, cooler tones, and that silvery illumination that I mentioned before. The wound is depicted as in a starkly realistic manner, which really eschews idealism or symbolism. It's meant to show it as a more visceral thing. And the flesh is stretched as Thomas inspects the wound. The characters are very rough and real, again eschewing the idealized characters of Renaissance art, the smooth skin and tightly muscled frames and soft everything. The tightness of the work focuses the viewer to reckon with the divinity made flesh, into the material testable state of the world. And much like in Caravaggio's version, it is visceral in that Christ is forcing Thomas's finger into the wound. It's not as dramatic as in Caravaggio's work, but it is still representative of the scene. And the soft flowing nature of the cloth is contrasted by the harsh reality of the onlookers' faces and hands. And that's one thing I wanted to look at here was the guy's hands, the old guy's hands and his face. And there's a reason why I picked that guy for the thumbnail, because I really think that is just an interesting, not the old man with the glasses. It's got a really interesting look to it. Of course, not just because of the glasses, but because of the wrinkles on the forehead. The soft shag on his chin. And of course, St. Thomas has very, he's got a lot of, he's got a scrunched up forehead as well. And then
Yeah.
the people in the back are, they have interesting, they have really interesting and sharp features on their face as well. He transforms the work into a meditation on proof and belief. And I think it's really well done. So,
I also find it interesting in that there's a period style depiction of glasses.
yeah,
And that's something where I think I think we take for advantage of, or not advantage, take for granted now much more. It's like, oh yeah, glasses so common. Yeah. That's a fascinating snapshot at the relative prevalence of glasses at that time.
yeah, yeah. Because it's not like lens grinding was super easy back during Jesus's time.
Well, yeah, or even ter Brugghen's time.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Although there was a lot of advancements made in optics in the 1300s, the use of eyeglasses I don't believe became super prevalent until much later.
Yes,
when
really the 18th century is when eyeglasses became more and more common.
Which makes sense. There were a lot of advancements in the 18th century or the 18th century. Kind of a shift in some ways. So, speaking of shifts and advances in Jesus's time, we're going to go on to the next one, and this one's going to be this is a chunk. I've got a lot of information on this one, and I was really excited to dig in on this painting because it was a subject that I am unfamiliar with, or I was unfamiliar with prior to this. So this is Saint Sebastian, tended by Irene and her maid, painted in 1625. This is an oil on canvas, and it measures 59 by 47 inches or 149 by 119 centimeters. It's currently at the Allen Memorial Art Museum at Oberlin College. And this is the story of Saint Sebastian. He was a Roman soldier serving under Emperor Diocletian at a time when being a Christian was often rewarded with crucifixion.
Yep.
He was a soldier, and he was kind of the inside man who helped captured Christians keep their faith and encouraged the captured Christians so that they would, not abandon their faith entirely. And he was really giving them aid and comfort. When his secret was discovered, Diocletian ordered him executed by having him stripped and then bound to a tree or a post, depending on the story, and then shot full of arrows. The executioners, they shoot him full of arrows and leave him for dead, but he does not die. Instead, he's found by a Christian woman, Saint Irene, who tended his wounds. After he recovers, he doesn't flee. He faces the emperor again after he recovers and denounces the persecution of Christians. Diocletian then has him executed again, and this time he's beaten to death, and his body is disposed of in an ignominious way by having him thrown into the sewer. So, talking about Saint Irene here, because I was not... I'd not heard of her. Of course, I had not heard of Saint Sebastian before this either. But here's an excerpt on Saint Irene from the Antioch Patriarchate. It's a Greek Orthodox history site. So this is Saint Irene was the daughter of a princelet called Licinius. She was named Penelope by her parents, though through a divine revelation, she was brought to the faith of Christ, and at baptism was renamed Irene. In her zeal for piety, she broke in pieces all the idols of her father, who commanded that she be trampled underfoot by horses. So while she remained unharmed, one of the horses rose up and cast down her father, killing him. By her prayers, she raised him to life again. And then he believed and he was baptized. And afterwards, in many journeyings, Saint Irene suffered torments and punishments for her faith, as was common for Christians at the time. But she was preserved by the power of God while working dread miracles and converting many thousands of souls. At last, she came to Ephesus, where she fell asleep in peace. And in the first half of the 4th century, 2 days after her death, her gravestone was found lifted off, and her grave was empty. There are at least two churches. At least two churches were dedicated to Saint Irene in Constantinople, and she is known as the patroness of the Aegean island of Thera, and she is commonly called Santorin or Santorini, which is a corruption of Saint Irene. The Feast of Saint Irene occurs on May 5th every year.
Well, that's for the Orthodox. In the Catholic calendar, it's April 3rd, I believe.
Oh, okay. So the oh, there you go. And I'm just going because I never knew about this story before, and I found it very fascinating. And it turns out there's a church in Romania that has a statue of Saint Sebastian outside of it, and it's a really cool statue. And I should have put a picture of it in here. Because it shows, the figure of Saint Sebastian pierced by arrows with a halo of gold on him, which is it's a really striking image. So there's a lot of other depictions of this scene, of course, like many other scenes. And contrary to the other depictions, Saint Sebastian is not depicted in heroic fashion, because normally he's the focus of the scene. And if you look at the Renaissance style works of this, he's of course very beautifully stylized, and he looks very heroic. In this one, ter Brugghen rejects the beautiful martyr trope of the other depictions, and really shows him as human, because he's slumped, and he's kind of sickly looking, as you would be if you were shot by a bunch of fucking arrows, and Irene is supporting him. So, and like I said, Irene is tenderly supporting him while removing an arrow, while her maid works to free him from his bindings on the tree. And her face really shows a care and mercy. The red cloth that he's sitting on really cushioning Saint Sebastian symbolizes the blood and the violence of the act that just occurred without it being made too visceral, and it really gives a bright, it anchors the composition and gives it a really bright focal point there. And then of course the lines of the light, because your eyes are really drawn to the red cloth, and then as you follow the lines of the light up his body to the face of Irene, who does look very caring and compassionate. So while most depictions of this work focus on the moment of execution, this one really focuses on the aftermath, on the impact of the human intervention, and really on the mercy of Saint Irene. So it's called the Saint Sebastian tended by Irene, and to me it really seems like Sebastian is more of a set piece in this painting that is used to highlight Saint Irene. So although he's front and center and takes up the majority of the composition, I think that she is really the focus of it.
I just, from the lighting and the skin tone alone, you can tell that she is the focus.
Yeah, because the pallid tone of his flesh really does show. It almost looks like he's dead already.
Yeah.
And just looking at this image, I would say that, oh yeah, he's they're just taking it down a dead body. But once you learn the story of it, and you find that he actually survives this, which is a miraculous thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then not only survives this, but doesn't run from it after he survives, but then turns and reconfronts Diocletian, which is a fun word to say. I'm gonna say I love saying that word, Diocletian. So I was telling Bleach in our chat, is like I get to say Diocletian a lot because it's a fun word to say.
So what I'm hearing is you want Diocletians in chat.
Yeah. So this really, the composition really shifts the narrative of the work from just being pure martyrdom to one that also reflects mercy and compassion. I mean, it doesn't downplay Sebastian's martyrdom, but really it highlights the mercy and compassion that Irene showed him. Irene and her maid showed him by tending to his wounds and nursing him back to health. The arrows are not the main subject. Irene caring for the broken body of Sebastian really does become the narrative focus in this layout. And
I also kind of like the angles in this work, because when you're looking at it, you've got kind of it's almost like a triangle there.
Yeah, it does. It has that kind of pyramid layout that we see in a lot of Baroque pieces, where it does. It has the pyramid of people. You know, we saw that in a lot of compositions, especially Rembrandt's composition showed that in a lot of his stuff. But and another thing is it's done outside, out in the open. So there's no hiding from it, but the open sky and everything really shows there's no hiding from this act of compassion. It's out in the open, anybody could see it. And Irene unapologetically and really not, she's not trying to do this. There's no subterfuge in here. She's not trying to, surreptitiously save him. Even though, and this is out in the open, if she's seen aiding him, she suffers death as well. If any of the soldiers would have seen her tending to his body, then she would have been executed as well. Especially because at the time, it was a really big deal for Christians to profess their faith and not shy away from it. You don't deny your faith.
Yeah, exactly.
And so there's a really there's a lot of really great elements to this painting, aside from just the really cool, like the realism of everything. The flesh around his wrists are where the bindings are is bunched up like you would think it would be. And then
the maid's hand. Yeah.
The maid's hand is also shows the tightness of the bindings on there as she's unwinding it. And I think that the harshness of the lighted side is really in stark contrast to the softness with which she cradles him. And her hand is depicted in a very soft way. Of course, in the shadow, but it's not harsh and stark. And it could be, he could have put something like that in there, but instead he chose to make her seem more softer there. And the pallid tones of his flesh, especially on the face and everything, are in such contrast with not just the maid, who has a much more flesh tone to her, but into because Irene is kind of pale in a way too, but not pallid. Like, she doesn't look sickly like he looks kind of sickly.
Yeah, she doesn't look like a corpse.
Yeah. And then, of course, the detail on it is phenomenal as well, because that cloth, the red cloth, I think is really, we saw Van Dyck's painting of cloth, and we've seen lots of depictions of cloth, and they always are impressive to me. The detailed put into cloth at the time. Of course, because we look at, you know, in modern times, we think of what a pain in the ass it is to get, you know, extremely detailed cloth. But this is even more so then. And another part of that cloth too is that it's likely that cloth was Irene's, because she was, you know, she was not. She was somewhat of a royal person, right? I mean, her father was a princelet, so she would have some rich cloth to her or with her, and so it's very likely that is her cloth that she's put down, or her cloak or shawl, whatever, that she's taken off to help cushion his body while she tends to him, which shows another level of compassion.
And also, you know, worth noting at that time, cloth was, you know, fine cloth was considered a very, very important commodity, especially in, you know, the Low Countries, you know, Netherlands and Belgium, to the point where in Ypres, Belgium, they have a place called the Cloth Hall, and that was the center of commerce for that region.
Yeah.
And this is just reinforcing a kind of a cultural aspect of this that you know, ter Brugghen would have understood intimately and is now depicting, and that's amazing. I love this detail.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and of course we saw during Rembrandt, because he painted the Clothiers Guild. You know, he did that portrait for them. So yeah, that cloth was very important, and rich cloth was very important. And it often did symbolize royalty, and especially in like the 3rd or 4th century when this would have taken place. So again, I think a phenomenal depiction of this story, and a really amazing story on its own that you know, that I'm just been introduced to, because I'm not, you know, I'm not Catholic, I'm not I'm not really anything, and I'm just coming into the knowledge of a lot of this stuff, and so it really impressed me. And especially when I looked at other depictions of this scene and saw how Sebastian is often the focus, which he is a very heroic figure himself, but Irene showing the compassion, like the true compassion of Christ, in tending this man's wounds and saving him, because she could have just left him to die. You know, she could have, and it would have been safer for her to do so. But instead, out in the open, without hiding, without any fear of persecution, she really worked to save him. So a masterful translation of the story, I believe, and a really great story on its own. So with that, we'll jump to the next one, because the last one's going to take a bit of time too. So we'll get through this one and then jump over to the last one. So this one is Bacchanate with an ape. And I thought this was just a really fantastic painting. And when you Google his name, this is the first painting that comes up.
Yeah.
This was painted in 1627. It's oil on canvas, and it measures 42 by 35 inches or 107 by 89 centimeters. And it's currently located in the Alta Pinacoteca in Pinacothek in Munich. So obviously a Bacchanate is a follower of Bacchus, the god of wine and debauchery. So in this depiction, the subject is in traditional garb, holding a large platter onto which she's just taken the moist grapes from. And there's a really interesting detail, because if you zoom in on the grapes, you can see moisture dripping off of the grapes back into the platter, showing the freshness of the grapes. The rosy cheeks, red nose are of course hallmarks of intoxication, and the accentuous expression and exposed shoulder helps depict kind of the abandon of the subject. Of course, she's her almost tits out too, so really working
Just being
to
very Rubenesque.
yeah working to show the or embody the bacchanate, the moral depravity or debauchery or just wild abandon at the time. And yeah, and contrary to Rubin, like the character is soft, but not like, she doesn't look chubby. Like her face is very tight. And if you zoom in on the eyes, there's a little bit of red in the eyes too, which I think is also a cool touch. And then there's the monkey. They say ape. The story is ape, but that's a capuchin. That's a monkey. But monkeys in paintings like this were often, they symbolize base instincts, human folly, or imitation. The ape holding the grape symbolizes the imitation, but also mirrors the base instincts of the central figure and is parodying human behavior. The handling of the light and textures reflect his assimilation of Caravaggio's dynamic realism. The heavy shadow and directional light help to highlight the figure and accentuate the realism of the painting. It's not really cartoony or stylized. The subject is depicted in a fashion that really does make them look real. It's got a heavy dose of realism to it. And the scene is a reflection on Dutch moralism, warning against the dangers of excess and debauchery. There was a really strong, of course, one, because they're Protestant, they had a lot of moralism in there. And then also in Utrecht with the Catholics, like the church was very powerful, as you well know, which often took the form of moral impositions. So an interesting painting and one I really enjoy. But we're going to jump to the last one because this one's going to take some time to talk about. And this is Jacob reproaching Laban. So this was painted in 1627 as well. It's oil on canvas. It's a little bit smaller than some of his other ones. It's 38 by 45 inches. They say smaller, but that's still a big fucking painting. Or 97.5 by 114 centimeters. And this is currently located at the National Gallery in London. And this depicts the story from Genesis chapter 19, verse 21 through 35, where Jacob agreed to work for Laban for 7 years so that he could marry Rachel, Laban's youngest daughter, and the woman that he loved. But on the wedding night, Laban gives Jacob, instead of Rachel, he gives her Leah. Jacob had previously deceived his brother Esau to steal his blessing, and now Laban has deceived him. And Laban says, "It is not our custom to give the younger before the firstborn." And that was what Laban said when he was confronted. Laban then offers Jacob to work for another 7 years to marry Rachel. So while Leah is married and unloved, which God sees, and he allows her to bear 4 children while Rachel always remains barren. And so you know with the story, can you give us a little more detail on Jacob stealing Esau's blessing?
So, because if I remember right, it goes back to Jacob's birth, even where there's the grabbing by the heel, trying to be the first one at all times, and that's what mostly Genesis, if I remember right. Which it's been a long time since I've gone through Genesis, but yeah, it's like there's something about like a bowl of stew, and because Esau is the firstborn, Jacob Jacob takes it. So there's that constant. Jacob keeps wanting to have the best, even though Esau. I think Esau ended up going like marrying some two Hittite women or something like that. It's very muddied for me right now, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, it's like this constant, like Jacob being the second born, Esau being the first, and Jacob is constantly trying to one up his brother.
Right. And
that
an interesting thing to note on that too is that Esau is who the Goyim. Goyim are descended from Esau, and the Hebrews are supposedly descended from Jacob. And specifically, they're descended from Jacob through the line through Judah, who was Leah's youngest child. So that's kind of an interesting detail when you look back on it, because it shows kind of a deceptive and venal nature from the onset.
Yes.
So
and then he was also the father of the 7 son or the 12 sons, Reuben, Simon, Levi, yada yada yada.
Yeah. So back to the painting. So this shows the moment of Jacob's confrontation. The moment of Jacob's confrontation is captured by ter Brugghen. He's seen reproaching Laban as Laban is justifying the deception, while Leah stands by observing the confrontation. And then in the background, Rachel is Rachel watches from the background, and of course Rachel has long blonde hair. I think that's depicted in the story. And Jacob's holding a shepherd's crook, and that really defines the painting in a way. So it splits the painting, and it shows Laban and Leah on one side and Jacob and Rachel on the other side. Showing them to. Okay, looking at LGM in the chat. He says Esau was the ancestor of the Edomites. The Europeans are descended from Noah's son Japheth, according to the Bible. It's a good detail.
Oh yeah.
So Leah's expression really, her expression and her posture, it really belies her despondency. As she's being rejected by Jacob, like she's married to him at this point, and he's coming out and going, "Fuck you! I didn't want this bitch," which is really like a horrible thing. And then at the same time, her father is saying, "Well, nope, you broke it, you bought it," basically, so she's really just a pawn in this fight between these two men, because of course Laban was trying to take advantage of Jacob by making him work for him for 7 years. And of course, after another 7 years, so 14 total years, he worked for this guy just so he could marry 2 of his daughters. But of course, Leah was never loved by Jacob, which is really a tragedy, and which is why God gave her children, and then did not give Rachel children. So I think that it's an interesting encapsulation of the story. Of course, Laban's expression is so Jacob is of course shadowed, and Laban looks old and kind of Jewy, as he's legalizing is what he's doing. He's saying, well, it's not our custom to give the younger before the firstborn. So even though he made a deal, he's kind of reneging on the deal in a way, which is again, an interesting it's an interesting detail about historical progenitors.
Yeah, and it's also kind of an interesting little scene here in a lot of ways, because there's a lot going on. and you've got a wine glass in the background, and the thing on the horrible looking thing on the plate. Good Lord, what is that?
It's
Anyway,
supposedly leftovers from the feast, because of course the story goes that they have a night, like they're celebrating the wedding, and they have the feast and everything, and then it's not until the morning that Jacob wakes up and realizes that he's actually with Leah, that he's actually bedded Leah on the wedding night instead of Rachel. And that's when so like I said, he's already had his way with her. He had a drunken night of debauchery with her, which is not really debauchery because they were married, but he's coming in the next morning after it's all said and done, and is saying, "Hey, dude, you tricked me. I don't want her. I want that one." And so then Laban's like, which is, that's a brutal thing to say while she's standing right there.
oh yeah,
Jacob's
oh
being
no,
a
no,
dick. And although Laban did he did trick him, Jacob is being entirely disregarding of Leah as a person, right?
oh yeah.
He sees Rachel as a prize. He sees Leah as a burden. And the really, like, there's just a lot of great parts to this, in the people, because the paleness and the despondency of Leia it's so obvious. She's so off put by this, that it really is a heartbreaking scene, um, to see this callous, uh, two callous men using her as a pawn, um, which
In their
God rewards
personal
her for
bickering.
later. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. She's just a pawn in their personal battle, and so that's I really I liked this painting, for that detail. First, there's the legalizing aspect in Laban, the anger of Jacob, um, the kind of surreptitious stalking of Rachel, and then Leah, who is, once you know the full story, to me, she becomes the focal point of this painting. The Much like Irene, is the focal point of Sebastian, she's the focal point in this painting, and not just because the pale hue of her skin draws you to her, but because, um, of the bullshit she had to put up with.
Well,
You
and
know?
she's the only one that doesn't look like she's scheming in this painting.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Uh,
she's very much the
Laban,
only person in the whole story that isn't scheming.
yeah, even Rachel in the background. It's like, yeah, she's eavesdropping.
Yeah. Yeah, and the division of the shepherd's crook puts, um puts the line draws you towards Rachel, and divides it between, Jacob and Rachel versus Laban and Leah. But Leia's the ultimate victim in this story. She's ultimately the most victimized person in the story. And while Jacob really wanted children with Rachel, God made her barren so that she would never have children, which was meant to kind of like a breaking of a pact, right? So it's a theme in Jacob's life that he suffers through his own folly, through his own selfishness, and this is just a continuation of that. So that's that's what I got. I think that's gonna wrap it up for this episode.
Awesome. Well, another thoroughly researched episode, sir.
Oh, thank you. Next week, we're moving forward in time a little bit. We're going to talk about Jean-Henri Fengro, who was a French Mannerist, or I mean, a French Rococo painter. Which, of course, Rococo. This will take place a little later. We're going to jump forward in time it'll be about a century. We'll jump forward in time. So it'll be the mid 1700s that we talk about the Rococo movement, which was a movement that came after the Baroque movement and really reflected the I would say the ostentatiousness of the French Revolution and the French royalty. So lots of big fluffy painting or big fluffy dresses and kind of scandalous scenes, but still an important subject that I think needs to be talked about before we move into neoclassicism and romanticism. So we'll wrap up there. Thank you, Bleach, for coming along here. And
Always fun.
Yeah, this was a fun episode, and I appreciate everyone who's watching. And thanks for coming out, LGM. Really appreciate you. And with that, we'll sign off.
Thank you all, and go out and look at some art.